much, Vicky. Great to be here, and I hope that all of you can hear me well enough. And as Vicky said, please feel free to send her a message if there's some technical problem. I am mindful that I'm actually on this call from darkest, deepest Devon, and we don't have the best internet in the world here, sadly, where I live. So it should hold up. Normally does. So fingers crossed. My name is Anthony Eldridge-Rogers, and as Vicky said, I'm the lead and creator for the Executive Coaching for Health program that we present in partnership with the AOeC. And just very briefly, my passion and interest is really the relationship between all aspects of human health and coaching, executive coaching. So I'm particularly interested in how including coaching into coaching all health inputs changes the way that we think about coaching, the way that we go about coaching, and also changes the outcomes for coaching. So that's going to be something that we're going to be digging into a bit here on this webinar for the next 50 minutes or so. The title of this was, I gave to Vicky to hand out, Food and Nutrition, Are Your Clients What They Eat? And that's a bit of a cheeky title, really, because that phrase, you know, you are what you eat, some of you may know was around kind of in the 60s and 70s, and it was really around this idea of this awakening idea that, you know, our bodies are the sum total of what we eat. And I think that's kind of an obvious statement. But what I want to do today is I want to talk about nutrition and what we eat, and also to some extent what we drink or you know, the liquids we take into our body in the context of coaching practice, because really that's what my main interest is. And I'm also interested to inspire coaches to think about these kinds of topics as not ones that are sort of added extras to coaching practice, but are actually foundational to coaching practice. So I'm going to jump in and we're going to give that a little bit of context. If I can get my next slide to go forward. There we go. So just to set the scene a bit, when we go to coach, when we sit down with another person, and actually it's not just coaching, it's pretty much every kind of helping profession this applies to, but we're talking about coaching today. When we go to coach somebody, what we're really doing is interacting with their brain. The brain is the executive control center of a person. It is where they tend to think from, in the sense that we tend to think about ourselves as thinking from the brain. It is where we see vast amounts of research taking place at the moment in the field of neuroscience, which is showing us more and more what's going on inside the mind. And the brain, of course, is one of the great unexplored frontiers of science, really. Although we do know a lot more about it, we still have a long way to go. But when we go to coach somebody, what we're really doing is interacting with their brain. And when we think about the process of change, so when we think about coaching as an interaction which takes place to generate change for the client, people don't come to coaching generally without something wanting to be different. When they step into that space with us, we are embarking on a process of brain change with them. So the functioning of the brain is absolutely critical. Actually, what's going on in the head, in the mind, in the brain, the way that it is interacting, its fitness for purpose, if you think about it like that. It's a little bit like, it's not my favorite analogy, but one that I use about, you know, if you think about an athlete and their muscles, in order to run well, you need to be able to run, and you need to know, you know, you need to have technique, but you also need to have appropriate muscle functioning, and your muscles need to be fit for purpose. In the same way, our minds and our brains need to be fit for purpose. And really what we're interested in understanding, on this next slide you can see, we putting forward the proposition, I'm putting forward the proposition that the functioning of this is crucial, not just from the way that we think about how people think and how people therefore behave, but also actually what is influencing the brain to be optimized for functioning. And of course, when you think about that, you realize that a lot of things influence the way that the brain works, and they are not this list that I'm offering here isn't if you like, a finite list, but we are pretty aware now that the main broad things that are important to the way that the brain functions cover such things as exercise, rest, sleep, what we do, so even things like taking international flights around the world and so on, all have an effect on the brain through not just direct impact on the brain, but through the functioning of the body. As you'll see in this diagram, the brain is sitting in the top of the head of what is the client on the right-hand side, and the coach is on the left. But you'll see, it's at the top. It's at the top of the body, and of course, this is really important for us to constantly remember that the brain is completely and utterly dependent on the body, which it controls. So it's a very interesting relationship, this one, between the brain and the body, because the body is there to, and it has to be optimized in certain ways for the brain to be functioning properly. That functioning properly is influenced by the inputs that go into the body. So all the things which affect the brain, and that is obviously the things that we need to survive and to function well. But then the brain is also in control of the behaviors that put many of those inputs into the body. So it's kind of a very interesting, complicated relationship. But what we want to focus on today is that there are a number of key inputs for a healthy brain. Here's a list, and it covers, as I mentioned just now, exercise, nutrition / hydration, sleep, relaxation, the way that we manage illness / disease, our mental fitness, our emotions, and social interactions, which covers everything from our involvement as a society, family, relationships, and so on, which is a very broad group of things to think about when we think about our life. Now, what we're concentrating on in this webinar, and I don't know if any of you listening to this have previously attended the one where we focused on sleep, but in each of these webinars, we're focusing in on one of these inputs, and we're going to be looking now at nutrition and hydration. Now, nutrition and hydration, I'm sure I don't need to tell you that if a person doesn't eat or drink properly, and by properly I mean in sufficient quantities of sufficient quality, then there is a detrimental, a negative effect on the brain and the body. Well, if we just take a step back here and think about my statement earlier on about the coaching relationship is interested in the brain, its performance, its functioning, and its ability to adapt and change, because that's what a coaching process is. It's a change process. Then we can see that nutrition, what people are eating, and their hydration and so on, if it's affecting the brain, is effectively making a difference to coaching outcomes, not incomes. Although it could be making a difference to coaching incomes, but no, in coaching outcomes. So poor performance or a low ability to change in a coaching assignment may be related to nutrition and associated behaviors. And so those are the behaviors which sit around how we get good quality nutrition into our bodies. So it's a pretty crucial issue. And you probably don't need me to tell you that there has been a huge rise over the last decade of food and nutrition related health challenges, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, and so on. So it is clearly an important issue, and most of the people that we interact with in our coaching practice are going to have some kind of relationship to food and nutrition and drinking and hydration that is impacting their performance, their well-being, and their ability to fulfill their lives. Now, what happens when we have suboptimal nutrition and hydration? And this is just a quick reminder for us all. Again, I'm sure you know about all this, but memory and cognitive impairment. A lot of research that shows us that poor nutrition leads to poor memory and cognitive functioning, and particularly the ability to concentrate. And actually, for people in their later years of life, it's also a significant influence on the development of cognitive illnesses like dementia and so on. So nutrition matters a lot for those kinds of things. Obviously, poor nutrition means the immune system is less likely to function well. It leads to fatigue, low energy, bad nutrition, overall poor quality of life. And then, of course, there are the illnesses, diseases which are related to inappropriate nutrition. They are, to mention some of them, obesity, which is a big problem, diabetes, which I've mentioned already, and heart disease. And then, of course, there's a correlation between nutrition and mental health issues such as anxiety and depression. And indeed, there is also a correlation between nutrition and more severe mental health issues such as schizophrenia, and also addiction. So there are quite a few interesting programs now that are offering intensive nutritional treatment for specific mental health conditions. So there's very, very much a clearly established link between the two. Suboptimal nutrition can also cause poor sleep, which I mentioned on a previous webinar is crucial to well-being. Benefits, of course, to getting it right are pretty obviously the opposite of all the ones I've said before. So it's more resistance to illness, better sleep, more energy, ability to cope with stress better, good mental well-being, which is really correlated with good brain function, and lowering of disease outcomes. Now, what's important to remember is that all of these things that we're talking about are interconnected, and that's why in some ways it makes it kind of difficult to talk about something, for instance, just like sleep, or to talk just about nutrition in isolation, because they're all actually linked together, all joined up. So we just want to remember that a lot of these things are all feeding into each other, all dovetailed and linked together in a way that is important to remember. And it's important to remember that when we come to work with our clients and we are trying to help them build a picture of all the different factors that are going into influencing their performance. So everything is interconnected. When we step into a coaching relationship, this diagram sums up for us the process that really is taking place that I've referred to before. So the coach on the left has an ability to coach, comes with skills, confidence, and experience. The client on the right comes with what we call an ability to change, and which relates to how they perform, how they can repeat tasks, how they can create and contribute, and of course how they can lead if they're in senior positions of leadership. And that relationship, provided is compatible, so above the heads it says there's compatibility, which some people call chemistry. When there's good chemistry between the coach and the client, they can work together on coaching objectives, which are of course the things that the client wants to change, and then they get outcomes, and hopefully we get outcomes which are successful. what we want to think about in terms of nutrition is that where nutrition will, poor nutrition will interfere, if you like, with this process taking place well, it will reduce an individual's ability to change. And so general low levels of health, low levels of nutrition, and so on, will make it harder for them to bring about the changes that they want to work on with you as they coach. So it's pretty relevant to the overall success of the coaching relationship. Now, one thing that's important to realize about this is we're not proposing here that you are necessarily an expert on food and nutrition. That's not what we're talking about here. What we're interested really, though, is in making sure that our clients are experts on food and nutrition. It's really the goal of this focus is to think about how our clients understand and behave in relation to food and drink that they eat. So there are obviously, and most of us have a pretty generalized knowledge of what are good foods and healthy foods, and what ones are known to support brain functioning and be supportive of health generally. So we usually want to, as coaches, have a grasp of that general knowledge, which of course is something that we talk about in our program. But it's important really that your client is encouraged to think about it. Now, it's important as well, before we think about engaging with our client, what stops good eating and nutrition actually taking place. And there's quite a few things that relate to this. I'm going to run through this list quickly. Habitual behavior, both individual and collective. This is really the stuff of everyday life. Most people get onto what I call like an eating groove. And the foods that they have and the foods that they navigate towards, and therefore the nutrition they experience, is very much attached to their habitual behavior, what they do every day, what they buy in the supermarket, what their partners buy in the supermarket if their partners are buying the food, and what everybody likes to eat. If everybody likes to have pizza in your family or your group of friends, it's always about pizza, you are going to really struggle to not have the pizza. You're going to have an influence towards those kinds of food types. And that's pretty important, because that's one of the major reasons that people report for finding it difficult to change what they eat. Stress and anxiety is also something that gets in the way, if only because we have, usually pretty much all of us have developed responses with food to experiencing stress and anxiety. So, it's that old cliche of, I've had a tough day at work and reaching for the fridge and pulling out the ice cream. An astonishingly large number of people have certain foods that they like to do that with. Not a lot of people reach for the carrots or the salad, for obvious reasons, because it doesn't contain high levels of certain kinds of fats and sugars. But stress and anxiety and your relationship to it does influence and make it hard sometimes for people to make healthy choices. Peer pressure, I've mentioned briefly, in habitual behavior, but essentially what other people do around you, both in the workplace and at home, matters. Past associations, this is really a person's longer term relationship with food and eating. And that can range, from they resist eating foods that they were made to eat as children. There can be emotional reasons behind that. So the way that people think about and associate food generally impacts on their ability to make choices. Obviously, stimulant use, appetite suppressants will influence what you're eating. General knowledge, a lot of people don't really know what they don't know about food. It's quite unbelievable. I put the protein example there because this is probably one of the greatest legends, urban myths of good nutrition. Everybody thinks that we need a lot of protein to survive. Well, actually, we don't need a lot of protein. We need a certain amount. It's well known what that amount is. Most people eat far too much protein, which is not good for general health. And most people misunderstand where protein can be obtained from. So not having the required knowledge can actually get in the way of people making healthy choices. Then, of course, problematic relationship with eating and food, comfort eating. So I'm talking there really about that emotional linkage where people are using food in a way to manage their emotional experience. I'm going to talk about that again in just a few minutes. And lack of self-knowledge, really not knowing people's lack of understanding about how food affects them. Because they've never studied it, and it's not to make people wrong or say that they're stupid, but some people have never actually stopped and spent very much time working through exactly what it is that gets in, makes them feel good versus makes them feel like low energy, high energy, that kind of thing. So that's an important aspect to be explored in coaching. Very quickly, health issues and illness affect the way that we eat and how we eat. And of course, if you have diabetes, kidney disease, are aging, obesity, etc. So you obviously are going to find it more challenging to manage your diet. And then, of course, you have illnesses not associated with food, so not things like type 2 diabetes, but another illness that can get in the way. And then, of course, there are the illnesses which are social conditions, should I say, as well, associated with eating and food: anorexia, bulimia, body dysmorphia, compulsive eating, food addiction, and so on. So those things will, of course, whether they're in a very low level condition or a very high level condition, obviously have an effect on nutrition. And good nutrition, the way that people think about those illnesses is important, because not a lot of people realize that those conditions develop slowly over time, and it's only when they become chronic that we recognize them specifically. And then drug use, of course, can affect how we eat as well. So executive coaches who are not explicitly trained in nutrition are not experts in nutrition, but that's okay. As I mentioned before, the goal of this conversation, and the goal is of our program, in fact, is not to make you an expert in nutrition. It's not. It actually is trying to include nutrition into the coaching contract and coaching agreement as a necessary component of somebody's overall health, which affects their brain, which affects their ability to perform. So our client's interest in nutrition is more important than our knowledge of nutrition, if that makes sense. So that's just an important differentiation between our approach and the other approach, where somebody is actually a nutritional expert, which of course you may be, in which case you would have effectively a dual skill set for someone. So what do we need to do to bring this whole topic into our coaching relationship? I'm just going to skip quickly through these. I just want to double check the time here. Okay, we're fine. So we need to establish nutrition and hydration as a relevant factor in performance and performance improvement. So when we come into a coaching assignment, we are faced, aren't we, with the proposition that here we are with this client who wants coaching, has agreed to have some coaching. Either you've been hired to coach them by their company, or they've hired you directly. They will have some ideas about what it is they want to achieve. They will have some objectives, and you will go about developing your coaching contract and relationship with them. And my argument and proposition is that we want to include in that contract as many different factors that may be impacting on that person as possible. We want to get as many things in there as possible. And so we really want to be interested and curious about how they feel about how they're sleeping, which I mentioned in the previous webinar, and what they're eating, what they're drinking, and what's their diet like, and and obviously other things would be included in there, like exercise and so on. But we would really want to be bringing that into the coaching conversation. And I often get asked, how I would contextualize that with a client who might be a little bit surprised. I've come here for some support in my leadership coaching and my management coaching and so on, and here you've brought up the topic of what I eat, or you want to include that in the coaching conversation. And the very the way I do it is I simply say to them what I've said to you today, which is, well, what we're interested in is getting your brain working really well. And we're interested in getting your brain functioning well in terms of a change process, because what the changes that you're going to possibly be making, are going to require effort. They're going to require you to remap your neural pathways. Your brain will physically change. If we put you in MRI scanners before and after, we see different things happening. So we're interested, and I as a coach am interested in making the success of that the most likely outcome. And to do that, we want to be interested in all the things that are affecting your brain. So I think that my proposition is that what you're eating or what you're drinking might be a factor, and you might be eating incredibly well. You might have optimized all your nutrition. Everything's going really well. So, that's great. Then we'll have got that box ticked. But it could be a factor. So let's just keep it on the table and keep it inside our coaching conversation. So we want to include it, and we want to have our client think about it. And certainly in the early days of a coaching assignment, I would be giving them, with their consent, of course, I'd be giving them assignments to go away and get really aware of what they're eating and what is the relationship. So you get them to talk about what they eat and drink in a general way. You're interested in their experience of food and drink and their relationship to it. Often people's relationship to food just sort of spills out of them anyway when you get talking about it. They'll tell you what they really like to eat. They'll, if they really like cooking, they'll talk about that. If they don't really know anything about cooking, but they really like good food, they'll talk about that. But really, you just want to get that into the conversation. We want to also give them an assignment to track what they eat. I mentioned before, and really, we're going to send you a form that you can use as a template to do this if any of you are interested to have a go with this. But we're going to make an assignment, give them an assignment, and then we're going to come back and we're going to take a look at that assignment, follow up afterwards to see what's come up for them, and we're going to discuss and establish their awareness and learning about it, and if necessary, agree some action if it's required. Now, I've put in here in brackets, do not diagnose. There is often the temptation. Sometimes clients will come back, and there can be a temptation to think that the client has got some problem with something that they're eating or drinking. If they disclose that, so they might come back and say, well, I did a diary for a week of what I eat, and I never realized I'm eating so much sugar, or I never realized that I'm, drink quite that much wine, or whatever it is. And it's very useful information for them, but we don't want to take that step beyond our coaching role and start saying to them, or reflecting back to them, I think you may have, a sugar addiction or a problem with alcohol, something like that. That's not your role. So we need to make sure that we don't get stuck into that. What are the common resistances really to people being able to proactively change their relationship to food? And in no particular order, but often what comes up first is emotional. Our relationship with food is very, very intimate, and it's very tied up with, for a lot of us, with our body image. It's very tied up with how we feel about ourselves, how we feel that other people perceive us. And often there are uncomfortable feelings that come up for people when they talk about what they eat. And it can often be related to, they feel guilty because they know that they should lose weight, or they feel guilty because they should exercise more, which is related to weight. So emotional resistance is relevant and important. Another way that people will offer resistance will be to essentially bring in this issue of lack of support in the home and in the workplace. Say, well, it's all very well, but every day my workplace brings around donuts at and there's nothing else to eat. And whenever I get home, my partner or someone in my family has always prepared dinner, and it's always, high calorie, full of fat, whatever it is, So that will become a resistance point, because it can seem really overwhelming for people to change their diet when there is a certain kind of set of behaviors around food surrounding people. And then, of course, there's the kind of workplace culture piece, which is, a lot of people don't want to step out of line. It's difficult for people to think about, suddenly saying, I'm not coming down, I'm not going to eat that food that we all eat today, that sandwich, I'm actually going to do something different. And so getting control of that in a working environment can be difficult for people to manage. A lot of people say they don't have time, which is really a choice. People, often feel they don't have time, but it's because they don't prioritize it and make time. And it's often a cover story for rather liking, feeling very attached to their default behavior around food. There's a social judgment, sort of the idea that it's becoming much more acceptable nowadays to have alternative eating habits. If you want to be a vegan now, it does not, you do not get looked at as if you've come from another planet, but it's an acceptable thing, but it wasn't always that way, and large parts of our society still consider certain kinds of eating behaviors as the normative behavior in that society, and that so if you don't conform to that, you are somehow being antisocial. And a lot of that accusation of antisociability often comes from people who feel irritated by the fact that you've suddenly gone on a health trip and started eating much better food. It can point out to them the fact that they're aware that they don't. And the last one here is resistance to data. So, sometimes people don't want to hear, they struggle to hear the new data. It's a little like that thing that smokers sometimes say to me. They say, well, they say that smoking is bad for you and kills you, but, my Uncle Harry chain smoked until he was 95 and never had a day's ill health, therefore equals smoking's okay, and it's okay for me to carry on smoking. And that happens a little bit with certain behaviors around foods. Uncle Harry ate steak every day, therefore it's, okay to eat steak every day, and my parents didn't eat any vegetables and they lived to be 85. So there's a lot of ways that people present with resistance to data, but it can all of that can come up. It's important that we investigate that in our coaching context, just because if somebody wants to has identified they want to make some changes, they're going to need to understand what their own personal resistances to it are. So most people use food and drink to manage their emotions. That's just the way it is. We all of us, for whatever reason, from flopping at home at the end of a hard day's work with a glass of wine, through to rewarding ourselves with a favorite pastry at a certain time of day, whatever it is. Everybody is giving themselves a reward, and the reward is an emotional experience. That reward produces certain good feelings. That's not what we're talking about here. We're just talking about the issue of degree, and people who obviously are in a relationship where the degree is harmful to them, it's going to be an issue. This is the diagram that we use really to make the distinction between wellness, recovery, and treatment. And it's important in terms of food, because most people most people's eating is in the top range there, the top part of the chart, which is the wellness zone. And then the recovery zone are really essentially people who've got difficulties with eating and nutrition, that need a different kind of approach, or need a supported approach that is trying to help them recover back and move back into the wellness zone. And treatment, of course, really refers to where there has to be a medical intervention of a certain kind in order to help somebody change their relationship with eating and nutrition. And so an example of that would be the stomach reducing surgery that is available for some people who are struggling with obesity, that that kind of issue. But most people that we are coaching are falling into the wellness envelope, which is really this is the top part of that chart. So they're people who, generally speaking, are staying within certain rails around their behavior. Those people, are usually aware of where their diets are a little out of whack. They are able to functionally change their behaviors within that sufficiently to get improvements, i.e. they don't get stuck with it. But a specialized nutrition coach may be required when a client is interested in optimizing and improving their nutrition and you don't have that skill set. And so it's really where they actually really want to dig deeper into the whole process of nutrition. The whole, some people are really interested in the actual science behind it, the vitamins. People just come along and say, this kale's got vitamin D and vitamin C and this, thing in it. That's their interest. Some people want that. So they may be required for some of your clients who are interested in that. You may need a specialized nutrition coach because the client requires more information you are able or willing to supply. And there's a possible health component that may correlate with nutritional issues. So some people have health conditions that make nutrition more significant and important, and they need specialist support to advise them on how to change their nutrition. That is not somebody who's necessarily got one of the recovery-related issues, which we're coming on to now, but it's somebody who may have some other health condition. So why would you need a specialized behavioral coach or some other kind of specialist? Well, they are sometimes required for people, and the markers of this, what tells us that this is the case, is if a client is unable to change or control damaging eating behaviors over time. So essentially, we can take these behaviors and mix them up and say, well, it's okay to eat ice cream, if you're not, ice cream eating is not out of control to the point where it's damaging your health. Now, if you recognize that something is damaging your health and are yet unable to change that behavior, so you're risking your health, then you may have entered into a realm of what we call dependency through to addiction. So that's a dependency to addiction continuum. So one end is, I'm struggling a little bit to stop this behavior, and the other one is it's completely out of control and I'm chronic. It's a chronic problem. So, but when somebody's unable to do that, to make that change or control the damaging eating behavior, then it is time to think about what other support they might need. Now, that could be somebody who's trained as a recovery coach, which if you took our program, you would be. So you would be able to offer that support and that coaching in that context. But if you had integrated health factors, nutritional factors into your coaching practice, but you hadn't, which you also can do if you take our program, but you don't want to or don't feel competent to offer the recovery piece, then you would make a referral. So it's it depends on the context of your skill set and what you want to do. But another reason why you might need to think about additional help is that when somebody has an emotional response that is essentially a little out of sync or out of norm to the change of eating behavior. And that can relate to the first one in this list, where they're unable to change it. There may be too much anxiety, too much guilt/shame, whatever. There might be an emotional response. And that is a sign that there's other issues at play. And then, of course, there are signs and symptoms of conditions such as over and under eating. Somebody who presents clearly too thin, and somebody who presents with high levels of obesity, and so on. These are signals that the body is out of balance, and we might want to be thinking about a referral and support for a client under those circumstances is going to be useful. They may also actually have a diagnosed condition like anorexia or bulimia, so that obviously would need to be included. There's also this unresolved and explored feelings and memories related to food, eating, childhood, and home of origin. Because food and eating is one of life's necessities, and we start from day one on the planet, a lot of people's relationship to food actually is linked unhealthily, if it's unhealthily, back to experience they've had when they were young, when they were children, and so on. So that is clearly a therapeutic realm, which probably, if it becomes an issue in the coaching relationship, it would be an appropriate referral point to bring in somebody who could do some therapeutic work in a certain kind of way alongside your coaching. And then a client may have dependency problems, which may fall into what we call the co-occurring disorders group, which means essentially that somebody may have a tendency as a personality or a person to be dependent or addicted to other substances. They may have previously overcome a drink problem or a drug problem, that kind of thing, behavioral problem. So, and quite often people will transfer their dependencies across different substances and behaviors. So, and they might present with that. So that would be a situation where you want to include the support of other referral resources. So you can see that the second group would be fitting much more down here in the recovery zone, because they're people who need additional support and additional input in order to bring about their behavior change in relation to their relationship to what they eat and how they eat, and so their nutrition. And that falls into a recovery paradigm, which is essentially marked out here in this slide, and it shows that it falls into recovery and also falls into the treatment paradigm. So there are specific specialized treatment programs that deal with people who have severe anorexia, bulimia, and those other clinically diagnosable disorders. So that's the other end, if you like, of the continuum. Now, of course, most of the people that you're going to be deal with for, as I said, into the wellness section at the top. But you will, of course, be wanting to understand whether a person is struggling to stay in that wellness zone, or whether they are slipping down into the recovery zone. So how do we do the referral? It's pretty straightforward. You, first of all, need to have the right resources in your network. So add a nutritional coach, recovery coach if you need one, if you're not going to do it yourself, therapist, psychologist, your referral network. Add them in. Find the right people that you feel comfortable with. Specifically, I'm very keen that all other kinds of professional services that you want to have on your referral list must have a deep understanding of coaching and how you work, because the main approach is going to be that they are going to be working with your client for a while whilst you continue with your coaching relationship. So they need to understand what you do. So it's not either or, it's both and. You propose the referral to the client, they select if they will do it or wish you to make the referral, and stay transparent. So transparency is key. I always show, offer, if they want me to write a letter, or, I always make it a highly transparent. My personal preference is that clients contact other practitioners directly themselves. I've always found that to be a more empowering for the client themselves way to do it. If you are working in the context of through HR or through an organization, you've been hired to coach, by the organization, then obviously you will need to redesign or manage that inclusion of this referral within that context. And of course, again, that would be done primarily by the client. You would want the client to be the one who takes the lead on that and informs HR, and then perhaps you have to have a three-way redesign session in order to complete that. Coach the client into a referral session and integrate into ongoing coaching. So like I said, referral for me always means working alongside. It doesn't mean replacing, but it may be temporary replacing, but you certainly want to be coaching your client about that referral. Finally, all of this applies to us as coaches. We don't get expect to be magically, perfect human beings. We all have our relationship with foods and substances, and it's important that we see this applying to ourselves. So when we think about our ability to coach and our ability to be present for our clients and so on, then what we eat makes a difference. All of those inputs that we were talking about at the beginning of this webinar that relate to the client, of course, relate to you. They influence how present you are and how optimized your brain is to be a really useful, resourceful coach. So I would encourage you to think about what you eat. I would encourage you to think about your relationship to nutrition within the context of being a coach, as well as thinking about it in relation to coaching your clients. So nutrition is important. We have, as has been mentioned already, we have the program, which really essentially covers how to bring all these inputs into a coaching relationship. It covers the recovery approach and the wellness approach, and of course includes the whole context of performance. Ultimately, what we're interested in is how can people optimize their performance, how can they be really brilliant at what they want to change and what they want to do, and how they can succeed. And we're interested in how coaches can be their best practice partner in bringing that about. So that is the focus of the program. And if you're interested in the program, contact Mandy. There's the details on that slide. And I think I'm pretty much up within a few minutes here, Vicky. So I'm going to close out and say a huge thank you very much. And if you have any questions, please put them in the chat, I think, and then Vicky will put them through to us. Back to you, Vicky.
Thank you ever so much. Wow, what a 50 minutes jam-packed, full of information. Thanks, Anthony. Yes, if anyone does have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, or Anthony, if you're happy, we can come off mute. There's only a few of us, so if anybody would like to ask any questions.
Yes, yeah, I mean, Vicky, if anybody wants to reach out to me directly via, please, they can contact you, and that's really absolutely not a problem at all. Yeah.
As I mentioned at the beginning, I will be sending a recording of this webinar out to you all. So do feel free to reply with any queries you have. Thank you. I do have a question here. Do you get brought in specifically to coach in the well-being space, Anthony?
Yes, I do. What is, as I said at the beginning of the webinar, actually, what I'm really passionate about is encouraging everyone to think about these kinds of topics as, a normal part of the way we think about working with other people. So, but I, do get asked to come in to work with people who have, got some behavioural health related issues. They're generally people who've got into a little bit of trouble around stress, perhaps sometimes around food, sometimes around alcohol, these kinds of things. But really, what the bigger conversation that I try to encourage all the time is to say that the science has really told us, neuroscience has really told us that we want to be interested in all these factors. And I think going back 2, 3, 4 years, everyone sort of saw health coaching as a sort of kind of add-on kind of thing. This is like a specialty we sort of add on, but in reality, all coaches are essentially all your coaching. If you're a coach and you're working with people, you have a client list and you're working with them, though the outcomes of your coaching are being affected by all these health inputs, whether you like it or not. And you may not be, coaches may not be talking about it with their clients, and it may not be part of the coaching agreement, but it is certainly influencing what's taking place in that client's life and what's taking place in the coaching relationship. So I like to think that we one day will get to a place where it's it won't be unusual for all coaches to be able and willing to include these kinds of things in their coaching practice.
And just a follow up to that, Anthony, what kind of reaction have you heard from more generalist coaches if this topic is raised?
Sorry, could you read that again, please?
Yeah, sure. What kind of reaction have you heard from more generalist coaches if this topic is raised?
Yes, well, I think that quite a lot of different reactions. Generally speaking, about 3 weeks ago, I was giving a presentation to a coaching group working right across government services in the east of England. And what was really interesting was how many of the coaches sort of reflected back just how actually it's pretty obvious that coaching outcomes would be affected by things like sleep, stress, food, and all these kinds of things. And yet they're also saying it's interesting how most coaching programs don't mention it or include it. So I think that coaches' reactions are sometimes a little bit like, wow, this is actually really kind of obvious now I think about it. But I'm also kind of wondering why, it wasn't included somewhere in my training. And that's something that, I think the AOeC and I are trying to change, really. We're trying to sort of say, well, actually, it can be included. So some people are quite resistant to it. Some people are quite old school, I suppose you might say, and some coaches I'm talking about sort of say, well, no, I'm a leadership coach. All we talk about is leadership, and I accept that could work. The bottom line really is, what will make I think all coaches want to be good at coaching, and they want to be successful and contribute to their clients' success. And so I'm just, if you think that this could contribute to your client's success more, then it's something you could include. And if you're perfectly happy not including it, then that's fine too. But there's a sort of fairly straightforward logic to all of this, which is kind of hard to ignore. But I would say that, wouldn't I? Because I'm biased. That's kind of my point of view on it.
Just to respond to that myself, I'm not a coach, so I'm just observing some talks that you've given to our alumni groups at various different times. And I would agree that it is a mixed bag of responses. Some are very wary of boundaries and contracting, but also there's a lot of nodding and agreement in the rooms, and thought of scenarios that people have come up against and remembered that there has been health issues in the conversations, and remembered that actually it has already happened with their coaching. So actually learning more as to how to manage that, people have been very interested in.
Yes, I think that what's important to remember about coaching is it's not a static field. It's a dynamic field. It changes. New things come along, new ideas, and so on. And I think what's interesting about the whole health aspect is that health isn't perceived as a new fad. It's kind of something we've always all known about. So I think sometimes people struggle with that because they're expecting us to, there to be sort of some breakthrough thing discovered that no one's ever thought of before, and that should be the thing that they learn to improve their coaching. But actually, I've seen some incredible results, really, that with coaches just integrating and just becoming aware of certain behavior and health related issues in their clients, and being able to suddenly spot things which are really getting in the way of their client's success, and being able to simply unblock them. And I'd use the example, I think, Vicky, you've heard me say, about sleep, where a client that I had, where there was all sorts of things were going wrong for them in their life, their performance, they're struggling at work, and all this stuff, really weren't doing very well. And it all turned out to be about sleep. It just, and when we actually got onto that topic, and we had a go at fixing that, and they started to improve their sleep, all the other parameters changed again, because their stress reduced, they were less fatigued, they could think more clearly, etc., etc. So it was a ripple effect. And I think that it really wasn't rocket science, but if I hadn't been looking for it and been interested in listening out for it and talking about it, we may have gone on for ages, kicking that can around the place and never really got the result that the client wanted. So it's just a bit of a wake-up call sometimes to see that what's getting in the way of success for people is often lying in plain sight. We just don't see it.
Well, 1 minute to 2. I think I'll bring this to a close unless anyone has any burning questions. But as we said, do feel free to follow up with us, and I'll send this recording to you tomorrow. But huge thanks, Anthony, for imparting your wisdom on us all. And thank you, everybody, for joining us this afternoon.
Thanks very much, Vicky, and all of you. Thank you.